Hey guys, welcome back to the video. In this video is my spoiler-free review for James Cameron's Avatar: The Way of Water. This movie has been 13 years in the making. It is an absolutely epic 3-hour blockbuster movie, and so there is so much to talk about with this. But before I get into all of my spoiler-free thoughts on Way of Water, if you've already seen the movie or you want to check it out, let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. And there will also be timestamps in the description down below for you guys to skip around on certain things I'm talking about, because I'll be talking about a bunch of different aspects, of course staying completely spoiler-free. But starting it off, I do want to talk about the general story, because if you guys didn't know, I watched Avatar for the first time just a few months ago when it re-released in IMAX 3D, made a whole video about my entire experience with the movie, and I thoroughly enjoyed the movie. But the thing that really just dragged it down overall for me was the story, and I think it's a pretty universal complaint. And going into this one, I was really skeptical about the story. I will not lie, I was a heavy James Cameron doubter here, but I am so happy that I was wrong, because this story, though it isn't anything too complex, it still just does follow the Na'vi. It does have a new clan, the Way of Water. I mean, you have all these new elements, but the story is still intriguing. Even if it's not anything too complex, I think they implement just enough themes to make it different from your regular white man goes to a new civilization, helps them go against the other white men. Like, it goes away from that classic Pocahontas story that we've seen so many times done throughout film history. And so this one, it completely goes away from that story. It's not formulaic in any sense, in my opinion, and it actually introduces some great characterizing themes. One of the biggest ones here, at least for Jake Sully, is a theme about fatherhood, and sadly, Jake Sully isn't in the movie too much, and as you can tell from the timestamps, I do talk about the characters just a little bit later in this video, but I want to get back to the general story. I think the way that they tie together the really interesting themes to an actually interesting story about these two clans, and then this other villain that's coming back, and the way that they implement the villain into this movie, I think the way that they bring it all together is really cool. Sadly though, I do think it is a little bit clunky. I'm going to get into the pacing in just a second here, but I feel like the way that James Cameron tied it all together didn't work too well. I think the first act of this movie really just feels like they're trying to tie as many strings together as possible. But I really do like just the general story, I guess I could say, like just the exploration and just development of certain things. It's like, it's all actually very interesting. This is a 3-hour movie, and I am going to give my pee break recommendation later in this video, but I can say I was intrigued for 99.9% of this movie. Was I fidgeting a little bit in the middle of the movie? Was like, okay, like, where are we going? Where are we heading? Yeah, that happened a little bit, but the visuals were so great. And obviously I'm going to talk about the visuals as well in this video because they're absolutely stunning. I still think the story is entertaining enough to where it's not going to deduct as much as it did for the first movie, even though it's nothing super crazy. Now, the bar with spoilers here is kind of weird because the trailer really didn't give any story away, at least the trailers that I watched, which I only watched the first trailer. I stayed away from the second one as much as possible. But there's a new clan, obviously. The clan, the Water Clan, is the Metkayani. I think that's how you pronounce it. That clan. I really like how they introduce this clan in the way that they merge with the Sully family and also just the Sully family in general. I really like the way that they merge all of these things together really well. And before I go into talk about specific character stuff, I do want to mention within the story itself, I'm not really a big fan of the ending of this movie. Now, you can skip forward to 30 seconds to like 45 seconds if you want, because I am going to mention kind of the ending, but I'm not going to say any names. But I think if you've seen the first one, you can put 2 and 2 together to kind of understand what the spoiler is. So just, again, skip forward 30 seconds if you don't want to hear it. But I don't really like the way that they end off our villainous character, because it feels like they're just ending it for that specific story. It's like, okay, you defeated, you can go home. But it's like, you still have that overarching problem of like, okay, if this guy actually does this, like if this similar things happen in the next few movies, I will get tired of it. And I don't know how fresh they can keep making this, because they've already done it for 2 movies. And it works here because the villainous character feels completely different. So it works. But the villainous character is already in their permanent state at this point, so there's not much further you can do in terms of the character learning and stuff like that. And I really enjoyed the villain's arc in this movie, which I'll talk about right now. The characters, I mean, the characters are great in this movie, but this is another small problem I have with the movie within the characters, is just that the cast is much larger. So everything feels a little bit too big. It feels like there's a little bit too much happening with these characters, which leaves some other characters super underdeveloped. So obviously you have Jake, and in my opinion, he's obviously still the best character in the movie because of these themes of fatherhood and the connections with his youngest son, which I do want to talk about the youngest son, because I will say, I think aside from Jake, he's my favorite character in the movie. I mean, he gets the most screen time, if I'm not mistaken. He's the one that connects with the Pyakon creatures. I think that's what they're called. He connects with all of these different things in the world of water. And so I think he's being put at the forefront of this franchise. At least I'd like to see that, because there's also a bunch of other stuff that does consist of spoilers, which I won't say. There's a bunch of other story stuff that really impacts Loak's character. I think that's how you pronounce it. Again, I'm sorry if I butcher any of these names, but obviously you also have Neytiri, who is played by Zoe Saldana. Neytiri is absolutely amazing. She's so badass. I love her character so much. I'm so excited to see her future of the franchise. And then you also have Quaritch, which is the villain guy. He does have some really, really cool development in this movie. In terms of character arcs, I think he's right behind Loak in terms of just how much his character changes, how drastic of a switch there is. You also have Natom, which is the oldest son. I think he's a cool character. He didn't get much screen time. He's definitely used more for pushing forward Loak's character in the story, but I like the utilization of him. You also have Kiri, and this is a character I had most of the problem with. And the main reason is because she's basically that the lady, the orange hair lady from the last movie, the redhead. She's that character, but like reborn into Avatar form, which means she is a teenager. And this isn't spoilers because it's been in articles. I read up on it just to make sure it wasn't a spoiler, because I really want to talk about it. She's reborn as a teenager. And so the voice is really weird. I'm not going to lie to you, but that's not all that's weird. Her character is like this mutinous character. I mean, Loak is as well, because he has the blood of Jake Sully in him. He has 5 fingers, stuff like that. He's not necessarily fully from Pandora, but the way that they play off Kiri's character is they treat her like the outsider, and with the weird like voice and the way her character is just played throughout the story, she feels very misplaced in the story. And she has some cool abilities that come in handy near the end of the movie. And it's cool. It's a cool inclusion. But I really did not need her in the movie. And that's not to be mean to the actress. I think the actress did a really good job. I think the character has some interesting aspects. Like the whole mutant thing is very cool. And the way that they use that whenever they're going to the new clan for the Metkayani, like when they enter that clan, that's like one of the first things they notice is like, these people look different. They are weird to us. And they start to acclimate to it. And then there's other stuff with Kiri where it's like, okay, she's very different. She has these other things that are different about her and that make her weird to these other people in this other clan. And so it's like, she feels like an outsider, not only for her actual story purpose, but she just feels weird in the entire plot, in my opinion. But other than that, other characters, you have Tukatiri. I think that's how you pronounce her name, Tukatiri, which is the youngest daughter. She was really great. Her character was very cool again. Not too much screen time. I mean, the kids had the most screen time, if I'm not mistaken, throughout the entire movie. But her character was cool as well. And then you have Spider. This character is so funny. The character is just in a weird position because he's a human that was too young to be sent in cryo back to Earth, and so he grows up with the avatars and stuff like that. He grows up on Pandora, all that good stuff, right? It's a very interesting character, and it's a really cool way to actually use like the prologue of this movie and tie the strings together. It works very well. It's also a great tie to another character, which I don't know if this was in the trailers. I don't know where, if it was in any article, so I'm not going to say it because it's probably a really big spoiler. But the way they tie Spider to these other characters is really cool. But again, he's part of that decision by the end of the movie that I wasn't a really big fan of. And the final character I want to talk about, which is technically, it's not a character because there's no like actual voices, but it's the Pyakon creatures. And these are like the big whale creatures. And I will say there's literally one shot in this movie, or not one shot, it's like one scene where this big whale is fighting the smaller shark whale type of thing. That shark whale looks like a PS3 video game asset. I'm not going to lie. Like it looks really disgustingly bad. Like if it was on land, the graphics would look absolutely horrendous. But that's besides the point. That's just a small little nitpick. The movie looks amazing. I'll talk about the visuals in just a second. But also, if you're wondering, the reason why I'm talking about story first is because I feel like everyone just talks about the visuals all of the time about this movie, and people are actually interested in what the story is like, because we know it's going to be visually stunning. And I know I'm getting into visuals right now, but it is visually stunning, and I'll get into more specifics later. But back to those little creatures. Or they're actually pretty big creatures. I like the way that they're utilized. I like the story behind them. I like how they're implemented into the Medicayani clan, and I like all of the lore behind this clan as well. If anything, like, this world of water is so much more interesting than Pandora. I'm not even gonna lie to you. Like, I love the Na'vi clan, and I think they're very cool. And I think the distinction between the sky clan and the water clan, I really like that. And it's very, very cool to me. But Pandora is just not really that interesting. And maybe it's because we've already seen a full movie of Pandora, so I'm like not as interested in it. But like, even the sea creatures, the way that the bioluminescence looks in the water, it just looks so much more sick. And also, it's like the flying creature that Natira uses is really cool. But the ones that Jake and all the other people in the other water clan are using, that like they fly, but they also dip underwater and they like speed up when they go underwater, it just all looks way cooler, to be honest with you. Like, I was really just amazed by the creature work, and the Payakan creatures were just a really big part of that as well. But before I go talk about more about the visuals, I know I'm going to get sidetracked with that and just talk about it a lot because I absolutely love how it looks. I do want to quickly touch on the pacing of this movie. More specifically, I'm going to talk about the final act in just a second, but the pacing overall is definitely another issue with the film because it feels too distinct. I like when a movie can seamlessly transition and it really feels like it has no actual acts. And I think the final act kind of did that in a sense, but that's not why I think it's really that great. I think it's great for other reasons. What I'm trying to say though is like the first act of this movie is literally just a bridge from Avatar to Avatar: The Way of Water. It's basically like tying in all these loose ends, telling us where our characters are. There's a time jump. There's other events happen in Jake Sully's life. Like, it's just catching us up to speed. And it's like the whole first hour. We don't even get to see the water people for the longest time, which I don't mind. I actually really like the way they built it up. And the way, like, going in, transitioning into the second act, you learn about these people, you learn about the world, and then the second act is really just exploring. And I also, I'm going to be honest, I didn't really notice, like, the montage in the middle of the movie where they're, like, learning stuff. I mean, looking back, like, actually thinking about it, yes, there was a montage-like thing. But in the moment, it felt so seamless. It felt like they transitioned, like them learning and stuff like that. It felt like they had enough moments within the actual montage that made it feel important for character building moments, to where the montage itself didn't feel like something. It's like, okay, we're going to throw in a montage here just so they can learn about stuff and it's easier for the story to move forward. Like, yes, obviously that was its purpose, but it didn't really feel like that. But that's just within the second act, because now getting into this absolutely amazing final act, I think the transition is like, I checked my watch. We had an hour left of this movie, and I was like, okay, the final battle has begun. It's going to be an hour-long final battle, and one that I've seen a lot of people compare about, and I completely agree with this comparison, is Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. You have your blue people fighting, and you have these other people fighting, and they're fighting, and it's cool. It's very nice. You have this nice mix of land and water, but what this movie does so amazingly is they transition from land to water to ship, and then the final act, like the ending of the final act, when I tell you it's like the most emotionally riveting experience of the year in theaters, I mean it. Like, there's this thing that happens midway through the final battle, like the final hour of the movie. Technically, it happens midway through the final hour of this movie, and it just propels this movie. Like, it pushes all of our characters forward, at least the Sully family, in such an emotional way. And it pushes Sully in a way that's like, this is what I want to see from the character. This is what makes this character interesting, is these actual emotions. I didn't feel that emotion in the first movie, and that's why it's a good movie. Like, I wouldn't rewatch the first one, but this is 3 hours long. And that final act made me say, dude, I need to rewatch this. Like, I'm ready to rewatch this tomorrow. Like, I'm ready. I'll be back with James Cameron. He wasn't lying when he said we're going to be watching this movie multiple times because it's so much to take in. And the final act just takes everything we've known in this movie up to a whole other level. And whether it's like the one-on-one fights, the big army versus army, the setup between the humans versus these avatars, like, it's so cool. Like the transition, the singular moments, the visuals, everything is blended so well. And it creates such an amazing final act. And again, one of the biggest parts of that is the visuals. One of the biggest parts of this entire movie is the visuals. So now to talk about the absolutely stunning visuals. I mean, whenever I go watch a movie, I really am captured by the visuals or I'm completely taken out. And for me, visuals are some of the most important things. Like cinematography, I value that probably second or third on my checklist for what makes an amazing movie for me. And this will arguably go down as the best looking movie of all time until Avatar 3 comes out, and then it'll be topped by Avatar 4, and then 5, then 6, then 7, then 8, then 9, and then 10. I think what makes visual effects so good to the point where it's like, you're just watching a movie that's fully CG, like probably pretty much nearly fully CG, like Avatar: The Way of Water, and you're like, what's actually CGI here? Like, what is CGI and what's real? Because if you just dressed up huge people in blue suits or blue paint, I would believe that this is what it looks like because it looks so perfect. It looks so seamless. How? Like, there's water simulations going on the body. I mean, you're watching this on a huge IMAX 3D screen. You see all of the little water droplets on their face. You see blood coming out from their lip, and you see them holding a human. And it's like, how all of these elements are coming together, and I just don't know what's CG. The human could be CG for all I know. James Cameron is doing his thing with the visuals, and it's spectacular. Like, I just don't know how to describe it. I was at awe for like 99% of this movie. I was like, how are they doing this? Again, there's one little part of the movie that I found very funny, that little shark thing. It just looked so bad. But it was just that little shark thing that threw me off a little bit. But other than that, this movie looks amazing. There's also this really cool thing that James Cameron did is I'm pretty sure all of the underwater scenes are at 48 frames per second. If you guys didn't know, normally you make movies in 24 frames per second, but James Cameron wanted to amp it up for this one to kind of create a different visual lens for different parts of Pandora or the water and stuff like that. And so I'm pretty sure he did it for specifically flying scenes and water scenes and most of the action sequences. But I also noticed this. As someone who plays a lot of video games, 48 frames isn't that crazy to me, like visually. Like it does feel very similar to 24. I don't know why, it's just a personal thing. And I think a lot of people that play video games would agree with me. 48 is what it would normally, like, it doesn't look that crazy weird. But in this movie, there's one moment where it's really weird, like it's like mid-swing and it changes to 48, and I could really tell in the final battle at that one moment in time. But other than that, I'm gonna be honest, I could not tell he ramped up the frame rate. I mean, it looked a lot crisper, like the wings on the creatures, they flap smoother. You can tell that there's a frame rate change, but you can't tell like when the change is. That's some good implementation there. That's using technology to the advantage of actually creating and building your world. Obviously, huge props to Weta Digital, everyone behind the CG and stuff like that. It looks amazing, right? But when you can utilize these like smaller, more nuanced aspects of technology, like changing the frame rate, which not a lot of people even do in their movies, if I'm pretty sure James Cameron is the only one who does this, but the way that he uses it to his advantage is really, really cool, and I really appreciate it because it just enhances the experience of being immersed into the water, being immersed into Pandora and in this different world. But moving on, the next thing I want to talk about is when you should go pee during this movie. So a lot of people have their recommendations. For me personally, I just would never go pee. Just don't get a drink. I got myself a popcorn. Do not drink anything. Do not drink anything at all. You don't want to miss a second of this movie. I'm going to be honest. Like, yeah, there is, again, that little montage part in the middle of the movie. And if you do want to go, I would go towards the middle of that montage part or towards the beginning of that montage part, because in the middle and the end, there are some key character stuff that happens and like stuff happens to a character where it's like, okay, I could have, like, if you missed it, it wouldn't be bad. But I would recommend staying for the middle and end of that montage part. So right when you see them starting to learn stuff, that's when I would kind of leave the theater to go to the bathroom and then come back. But other than that, to be honest, just don't drink water. Just stay there for the whole time. That's what I did, and it was an amazing experience. But speaking of the experience, should you watch Avatar: The Way of Water in 3D? I personally did, and I think it's the only way to watch this movie. I mean, I was really hating on James Cameron for being so high on his horse about this movie, just in every aspect. But I'm going to be honest, the man completely deserved to do so because, especially in 3D, this movie just feels like your world. Like the way that they use 3D in this movie, it's not for jump scares. It's not to like create something that pops out at you. It's literally to just put you into the forest. It's to put you into the water. It's to put you next to this sea creature. It's to put you next to this bullet. Like, it's so cool the way that they actually immerse you into this world using 3D. And I'm going to be honest, I don't think you'll get that from any other screen. Even more specifically, go watch in IMAX 3D. I know the tickets are way more expensive. I'm telling you, give James Cameron some extra cash because it's 100% worth it in IMAX 3D. So at the end of the day, is Avatar: The Way of Water worth that 13 years in the making, a 3-hour absolute epic blockbuster movie in IMAX 3D? In my opinion, yes. This movie is not only a visual spectacle and masterpiece, but the story is actually really interesting. Though it's not the most complex story, I think it does just enough with just enough different themes implemented into it to where it's still a super entertaining watch from the first to the final second of a 3-hour epic. Overall, I'm giving James Cameron's Avatar: The Way of Water an 8 out of 10. Again, I would 100% recommend this movie, watching it on the biggest screen possible in 3D. As always, let me know you guys thought of James Cameron's Avatar: The Way of Water in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Peace.